I don't know if you remember, but a long time ago there wasn't a Diablo game on the Play Store. That's when a lot of games inspired by Diablo started showing up, trying to capture the same hack and slash experience. And the truth is, nowadays we have plenty of games in that style, including Diablo Immortal itself, but if you're getting tired of it, today we're going to check out a bunch of great alternatives that deliver a very similar experience. So make sure to leave a like and let's get started. It's not crazy to think that Torchlight ended up losing the race against Diablo, right? So let's talk about its latest version, Torchlight Infinite.
Let me see her miracle once again.
For those who don't know, this series is actually quite old and was basically competing with Diablo to become one of the biggest games in the genre. Both games shared a similar gameplay style, but Diablo ended up becoming much more popular worldwide. Unlike some other games, this one features pre-made characters that you can choose from. It's also a bit simpler when it comes to RPG mechanics, focusing much more on defeating massive hordes of enemies rather than creating a completely unique path for your character. It's worth mentioning that even though some people might consider it a second-tier title compared to Diablo, this game still has a very active player base and also supports full crossplay. This is an extremely old game on the Play Store, and it might even be one of the first games to bring that more isometric RPG style. Let's talk about Total RPG. The game was heavily inspired by the classic Diablo formula, but you can clearly see that it also tried to introduce some new ideas. It features 3 main classes to choose from, and each one has 3 different subclasses, making the character system surprisingly deep. However, since we're talking about a game from 2014, it is naturally more limited in some areas, such as the amount of equipment available and the number of dungeons you can explore. But one of the biggest advantages of this game is how accessible it is. Unlike many RPGs in this style that can be extremely complex, Total RPG is very intuitive and easy to learn, making it a great entry point for players who are new to the genre. If you're looking for a more complete Diablo style game with an online experience, you definitely need to know Undecember. This game was basically created to compete with Diablo Immortal on the Play Store, and of course it delivers a very complete experience from its impressive graphics to its well-designed world and detailed environments. One of the biggest differences in this game is the character system. Unlike many other games on this list, your character doesn't have a fixed class. Instead, you can equip any weapon and use any type of skill, allowing your character to become whatever build you want. The game also focuses heavily on the hack and slash style, where you'll face huge groups of enemies and take them down with powerful attacks. And just like some other games on this list, Undecember is also designed with cooperative gameplay in mind, making it a great experience to enjoy with other players. The only thing this game really has in common with Diablo is the isometric camera, because the actual experience is quite different. Let's talk about VENDIR, Plague of Lies. This is a classic style RPG that features a massive campaign with plenty of choices to make and several characters that you can manage throughout your journey. The story focuses on a conflict between humans and vampires and how your decisions will shape the way you deal with this war. Every character has different dialogues and interactions, along with multiple endings depending on the choices you make. However, it's important to remember that this is a turn-based RPG, which changes the gameplay style quite a bit. Even so, the exploration, the medieval world, and the old-school atmosphere make it feel very similar to classic RPGs from the Diablo era. This one fits much more into the category of isometric RPGs. It has some similarities to Diablo, but it also brings a lot of its own ideas. Let's talk about World Eternal Online. I think the best way to describe this game is like a mix between a battle royale and an RPG. It features several characters for you to choose from, and the game starts by dropping your character into an arena where you'll fight NPCs, level up, and improve your build. But you also have to be careful because your enemies are doing the exact same thing. The main goal is to become the last survivor, but with a much stronger RPG focus, including character progression, equipment, monsters, and combat that feels very similar to classic isometric RPGs. This game is especially fun when played cooperatively, since teamwork and playing together with others are a big part of its experience. If you're looking for a Diablo style game that's offline and feels more modern, this might be the best one on today's list. Let's talk about ONIRO. This is another game without a major story mode. Instead, you're thrown into dangerous dungeons with a single character and an endless progression system that keeps you getting stronger over time. It's highly praised by players who enjoy classic isometric action RPGs. But what really makes this game stand out is its deep character customization. For example, you can improve things like poison resistance, fire magic mastery, and many other unique attributes. The game is incredibly detailed when it comes to character building, and some players even say it's more complex than Diablo itself, so if there's one game on this list that's absolutely worth checking out, it's definitely this one. Polygon Fantasy delivers that classic Diablo style experience, but in a much more accessible and simplified way, so let's talk about it. Unlike many of the other games on this list, which are packed with complex mechanics, meaningful choices, and multiple endings, this one keeps things straightforward. You can choose from 3 different characters and follow a linear story from beginning to end with a simpler progression system for your character. That doesn't make the game bad at all, it just takes a different approach, and honestly sometimes that's exactly what you're looking for. It captures a lot of Diablo's core feeling while staying easy to pick up and enjoy. This game is actually really impressive and has a huge number of downloads on the Play Store. Let's talk about SHADOWBORN. Just like many other games on this list, it doesn't focus on a huge story. Instead, the main idea is about corruption spreading throughout the world and your character trying to stop it. The game features 4 different classes for you to choose from, but the coolest part is that you can actually mix and customize them. For example, you can create an archer with necromancer abilities, combining different playstyles into one build. In my opinion, the combat system is definitely the best part of the game. It's smooth, responsive, and really enjoyable to play. The graphics are also surprisingly good, and it's one of those games that keeps things simple but does that formula extremely well. This is a game that's completely hidden on the Play Store, and to give you an idea, it's actually a PlayStation 2 classic. Let's talk about The Bard's Tale. Unlike many games on this list, this one has a completely different story. You play as a bard who is simply looking for money, taking on different quests and missions along the way, but during these adventures you eventually become involved in something much bigger that puts the fate of the world in your hands. Now this is a really fun game because your character isn't some legendary hero. You have different choices to make throughout the journey, and they can lead to completely different outcomes. On top of that, the game uses an isometric perspective, and many people don't even realize how much it resembles Diablo-style games. Titan Quest isn't a new game at all. In fact, it's a classic that originally came out on the PlayStation 2, and now it's available on the Play Store. Let's talk about it. The main idea is simple: defeat as many enemies as possible while constantly making your character stronger. It doesn't focus on a huge story campaign. The biggest difference is that instead of fighting through endless dungeons, you'll explore a vast world inspired by mythology, including the events surrounding Ragnarok, the legendary Norse apocalypse. You can build your character however you want, explore a large open world, and take on countless monsters along the way. The game became a huge hit because of its freedom, offering nearly endless progression and allowing players to create the character that best fits their playstyle. I think for a long time this was basically considered the Diablo of the Play Store, and there's a good chance you've heard of it. Let's talk about Dungeon Hunter 5. A lot of people don't know this, but the game is still available on the Play Store, and surprisingly it still has a pretty active player base. Developed by Gameloft, a company known for creating games inspired by popular genres, this was basically their own take on the Diablo formula. The interesting thing is that the game still managed to bring a lot of originality with unique classes, special equipment, and exclusive dungeons that gave it its own identity. Another great feature was that back in 2014 you could already enjoy cooperative gameplay with other players, and not only that, the game also introduced a really impressive PvP mode. I see a lot of people praising this game all the time, and honestly it really does look like a very interesting experience. Let's talk about Exiled Kingdoms. This game is impressive because of how many features it offers. For example, it has a massive open world for you to explore, along with a story campaign that gives you a clear objective to complete. But beyond that, there are plenty of other things to do throughout your adventure. Of course, the combat also feels very similar to the older Diablo games. However, I think the biggest highlight here is the story and the consequences of your choices. The game features multiple endings and different paths that your character can follow, and speaking of characters, there are several different builds you can create with many customization options. It's a surprisingly deep and complex RPG, especially when it comes to building your character. After doing some research online, I discovered that this game is actually much older than it looks. Let's talk about Fate: Reawakened. This was a game that also competed with the older Diablo titles using a very similar formula. However, it never reached the same level of popularity. This version available on the Play Store is basically the latest release, and it keeps most of the original gameplay style. There are some differences, but the main objective is still the same. Enter dungeons, defeat as many enemies as possible, and keep making your character stronger. One interesting feature is that your pet plays a very important role, and the combat also feels a bit more responsive compared to some other games in the genre. The game doesn't have traditional classes. Instead, you have a single character that you can customize however you want by choosing the weapons and equipment that fit your playstyle. Here's a game that's incredibly hidden on the Play Store. It's honestly surprising that something like this is still around. Let's talk about Forgotten Dungeon. This one takes a much more classic and hardcore approach. It's an action RPG where your main goal is to explore dungeons, defeat enemies, and continuously level up your character. And what really stands out though is the variety of skills and the huge amount of equipment you can use to customize your build. I'd say this is a true old school dungeon crawler. It doesn't really focus on a story. Instead, the entire experience revolves around clearing layer after layer of dungeons, getting stronger, and finding better loot. It's a simple formula, but it's one that works really well. Surprisingly, this game also feels like an isometric RPG, but at the same time, it's a survival game. Let's talk about FROSTBORN. At the beginning, it feels much more like a traditional survival game. You'll be gathering wood, stone, and other resources while building your own base, similar to games like Minecraft, but it doesn't take long before you unlock the game's open world and cooperative modes, where you can team up with other players. That's when you choose your character's class, equip your gear, and head into dungeons to defeat enemies and collect valuable loot. The game does a great job of blending RPG and survival mechanics, and honestly, it works really well. It definitely has that Diablo vibe while still bringing plenty of originality. Okay, I know this one might sound crazy, but I can't get it out of my head how similar this game feels to Diablo. Let's talk about Catacomb crawlers. Imagine Diablo but with a roguelike format. I think that's the best way to describe this game. You'll control a character and your goal is to defeat as many enemies as possible while progressing through runs in a classic roguelike style. I think it feels very similar to Diablo, especially because of its combat system. It has an isometric perspective, different characters to collect and experiment with, and of course fast-paced action gameplay. It's definitely a game worth checking out if you enjoy this kind of experience. An isometric game that feels a little like Diablo but with a much more online focused experience. Let's talk about Dark Divinity. This game is especially great if you enjoy cooperative gameplay since it feels almost like an MMORPG. You'll choose one of the 4 available classes and enter a world filled with other players. However, instead of giving you a traditional open world, the game focuses more on different dungeons that you can explore alone or together with other players. Unlike some of the other RPGs on this list where the combat is a bit more strategic, this one is much closer to a classic hack and slash experience. And of course, one of the biggest highlights of the game is definitely the combat system. It's fast, satisfying, and one of the best parts of the entire experience. And we're talking about a game that was released back in 2012 now, can you believe it? And surprisingly, it's still available on the Play Store. Let's take a look at Dark Legends. There isn't a whole lot to say about this one, mainly because of its age. It's a very straightforward dungeon crawler. You choose one of 3 main characters and dive into different dungeons to level up your character and become stronger. The game doesn't have a major story mode or cooperative gameplay. However, one thing that really stands out is its difficulty. Unlike many of the other games on this list, this one is far more challenging, so don't be surprised if you end up dying quite a lot. This one is actually pretty funny because it really is Diablo, but the oldest version of it. Let's talk about a game called Devolution X. I don't know if you know this, but after some time, some games can end up becoming lost media. This happens with many older titles, and it even happened with the first Diablo game. Because of that, someone created a very well-made port and brought it to the Play Store, and yes, it became surprisingly popular. The port is extremely well done, all the buttons work properly, you can experience the entire story, and the most interesting part is that many people play it without even realizing that this is actually the very first Diablo. Another thing worth mentioning is that the game is really challenging with that classic difficulty level you would expect from old PlayStation 1 era games. This is probably the newest game on today's list and also one of the most complete. Let's talk about DROVA Forsaken Kin. While it features an isometric perspective, it's only somewhat similar to Diablo. That's because the game focuses much more on its story, giving you the freedom to shape your character and make choices that influence your own journey. Throughout the adventure, you'll face different paths, choose how to develop your character, and even decide the kind of person they become. That's one of the game's biggest strengths. Of course, you'll also explore plenty of dungeons and collect powerful gear to customize your build. During combat, it definitely captures the feel of classic isometric RPGs, but at the same time, it brings enough originality to stand out on its own. I think the best thing about ASTERA is that while it's still an RPG with that classic style, it also manages to have a really good story. Let's talk about it. In this game, you'll create your own character and choose between 3 different classes. You'll return to your hometown and discover that a revolutionary church has taken control of the entire area. Now your mission is to defeat the enemies behind this invasion and eventually return home to your family. The game does have some similarities with Diablo, but the truth is that it brings a lot of original ideas, whether it's through the story, the abilities, or even the way you approach gameplay. ASTERA tries to create its own identity. Unlike many other games in this genre, this one focuses much more on a single player experience. A hidden gem on the Play Store, this one is perfect for anyone who enjoys classic style RPGs. Let's talk about ASTIAR RPG, an isometric perspective, a very complex RPG system, and plenty of choices to make with your character. That's basically what this game offers. You could say it's a true dungeon crawler with less focus on story and more on exploring dangerous dungeons filled with enemies and challenges. However, this game really surprised me with the incredible amount of detail in its campaign choices. Even the story mode gives you many different ways to change your journey and make the adventure feel like your own. It definitely brings back memories of the early Diablo games, but at the same time it manages to create its own identity with plenty of originality. Now imagine a game that's basically Diablo but with a more idle style approach. Let's talk about AVALAR. In this game, you'll build a team of up to 4 characters, each with their own unique abilities and playstyle. As you can see, your job is mainly to move the team around since your characters attack automatically. You could also describe it as a dungeon crawler where you'll explore dungeons, defeat enemies, collect loot, and make your team as powerful as possible. But unlike Diablo, you don't manually attack or activate skills. The real strategy comes from building the right team. The game features around 20 different characters and every single one can play an important role depending on your lineup, and honestly this game is way better than it looks. When you think about isometric RPGs, you usually think of Diablo, but one thing you might remember is that Diablo doesn't really focus on PvP. This game, however, takes a very different approach. Let's talk about BLADEBOUND. This is a relatively simple RPG where you'll enter dungeons, choose one of 3 classes, and defeat countless enemies along the way. However, the game really stands out because of its combat system, which I would say is one of the best in this entire video, and because of that, the game is also well known for having a great PvP mode. I think one of the biggest weaknesses of many Diablo-style games is their lack of competitive gameplay, but BLADEBOUND does things differently. Its PvP is one of the best I've experienced in this genre. And that's it for today's list. These are some of the best Diablo-like games you can find on the Play Store, including hidden gems and some classics that many people forgot about. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.